Alright, so this will be my second attempt at a video. Looking to maybe actually look in the camera a little more this time, perhaps actually talk to those who might potentially listen to this a little more. This time, also about D&D, I'm more so looking to talk about the campaigns I'm running currently, of which there are 3 right now. I'm outside. It's a lovely morning here in Santa Barbara. And what I want to talk about is the different kinds of campaigns in D&D. So in D&D, there are 2 basic groupings of campaigns. There are what's known as homebrew campaigns. Campaigns where, as it might imply, it is brewed from home. It is created, originated, and many of the ideas stem simply from the individual's mind who is creating this. Uh, those often have references to pop culture in terms of maybe names in the campaign or some thematic elements in the campaign. Uh, Homebrew campaigns can include things like someone wants to run a game that is just Lord of the Rings. Uh, though that now actually does exist. There's actually a campaign system for that. An example of a homebrew world could be someone wants to play through the movie Pitch Black. If you're a Riddick fan, a Vin Diesel fan, you'll know what that is. So that could be that's an example of a homebrew campaign, something that someone has seen and like, I want to do that. I want to see what it would be like to have friends of mine, acquaintances of mine, run through that world. And their envisioning of that world and their sort of expanding on what we know of that world and differences they make in that world. That can be a homebrew campaign. The other type of campaign is one based on or run in a pre-existing world. So for D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, currently the best known world, the world that might have the most books written on it at this point, is a world that is known as the Forgotten Realms, which is actually a collection of worlds. It is the campaign setting for a myriad of books that have been written over the last 5 to 10 years. The name of the most used world in the Forgotten Realms is, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Abir Toril. It's hyphenated because at one point these were 2 worlds, which were originally 1 world, and then they were brought back to 1 world. That's another video. So I'm actually running both of these major subdivisions of campaigns currently. The campaign that I'll be running today, one that I lovingly dub my TJ's newbie group, is completely homebrew. I knew that I wanted to make something for them, and I knew that I wanted to start them off slow, but I didn't want to feel constricted by pre-existing information. Something that I struggle with: if you tell me there's information about an area, I have to go and look at the information, and I cannot present that area without using or having the information factor in. Whether I go in the opposite direction, whether I run with it, it informs the decision I make, and I didn't want to have any prejudice about what they were going to interact with and how it was going to happen. I didn't want to be told and then have to either lean into it or lean away from it to feel original or needlessly new. Uh, so I chose to create a world, and the idea for this world started off very, very small. And that is something that, based on everything I've read, everything I've heard, uh, is important, and at the same time, probably the least common way that people approach creating a world. Is don't worry about the big picture. Don't, unless you're experienced, unless you've been doing this for years, unless you have a lot of time and the focus necessary to really get into the nitty-gritty of the gods, of every conflict, of the legends and the heroes. If unless you are experienced in doing that, unless you have the time and the energy and the focus to get in and do all the reading and all the research, and the imagination, honestly, to start creating these things, you will feel overwhelmed. And if you're anything like me, once you start down that path and you feel like you're not doing a good enough job, you feel like you're not delivering on the experience that your players deserve, you're not doing as well as you want to, you will feel like you're failing. And why would you want to set yourself up to feel like you're failing? So with that reality and that understanding in mind, I've definitely gone down that path at least once or twice, at least once in a major way, and did not like how it ended. And in that campaign, I actually sort of bailed out of that other world and transported my characters to a world that was already done and that had already been written on. And it was a relief to not feel like I was messing up a world. So this time, I've actually started with a very small, much more simplistic idea. The D&D game, it's on Twitch TV. It is streamed live every week. That I watch pretty religiously. It's in their second campaign. The first campaign lasted for over 2 years. It was a home game before that, so their campaign lasted for literally years. It's called Critical Role. And in this newest campaign, they started in a small town near a lake. And the campaign started a few weeks before I was going to start my game. And I was like, okay, this is convenient. Maybe it'll be my world, but I'll be lazy, and I'll just start taking ideas from this campaign I'm watching. So I'm like, all right, we'll just copy this DM, Dungeon Master, who is infinitely better at this than I am. Just utterly amazing individual, Matt Mercer. And I'll just ride his coattails. I can still innovate, I can still do different things, but he's so good at this. Why not let him do all the hard work, you know? And so I started out with drawing this lake and the first city sitting next to it, which I actually have. And I did actually draw out the first. Yep. My artwork is not amazing by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know how well that's going to show up on the picture, but yeah, you know, I drew out just a small idea of what this area looks like. And it was going to be a small lake at first. You know, nothing amazing, but just, you know, enough to give them a sandbox to play in, give my characters a sandbox to play in. And as I started drawing out this lake, and a couple of the elements I did literally copy directly over from Matt Mercer's campaign, it started to grow. And it went from what was going to be a small lake to a lake that, based on its proportions, all the things I put in it. I looked up lakes around the world in real life to give a comparison. It is now larger than Lake Superior. I haven't decided how deep I think it is, but there are multiple islands found on this lake, some of major size, some obviously smaller, and it all just grew out of, I'll start with this little thing. And as this little thing began to develop, it grew, and I was actually inspired, which is a great moment whenever you're trying to create something, whenever you're trying to dream up something unique or different. When you start out with just the little aspect of it, and then without really any effort or goal, it's grown to something more complete and more whole. So started out with what ends up being a large lake. All right, well, we have a large lake now. What can I do with a really large lake? Well, since D&D is set generally in a medieval-esque environment, a large enough lake, that's a lot of resources. Water obviously being very important, even today, especially fresh water. This means that everywhere around the lake is going to have more abundant resources. I also factored in several large rivers which would feed into this lake. So now we have islands on the lake, we have at least one city, we have a very large lake, we have rivers, and we know we have lots of resources. Well, with the abundance of resources, that will draw more people to this lake area. So with that idea, which is true historically, I went and said, okay, that means that this lake supports multiple civilizations. And if it's been a stable lake for long enough, this means that these civilizations have had a chance to grow and diversify and probably war. So I went from a small lake with a town, copying someone else's idea. Now I have a large lake with multiple towns and cities, and would end up being kingdoms. I ended up with the idea that each basically region of the lake, west, north, east, and south, actually represented its own kingdom. This was, the lake was one of the integral parts to that kingdom. And there was a lot of political jostling, backstabbing, manipulation that would go on in the major port towns around this lake. Each major port town representing a kingdom. I was like, all right, that's interesting. Let's try to name some of the islands I have. And I copied one of the names from a small isthmus that was in the game I'm watching, and then I thought, well, what have I read? And this is another important thing. The more you read, the more ideas you have to draw on, the more unique things you can come up with. I find that for me personally, when it comes to trying to generate completely organic, original idea, I'm terrible. I'm not sure that I have many original thoughts, unfortunately. But if you give me a granule of an idea, which is one of the reasons why I spend so much time on Facebook D&D groups and reading questions people have, people looking for ideas for their campaigns. You give me the granule of an idea, and I can run miles with it. The one that I most recently came across that I was really happy with my response, and I loved the starting question, which is probably why my response, I think, grew as much as it did, was in my homebrew world, there was a demon uprising. In D&D, demons are chaotic evil. They are the ones that want to watch the world burn just for the sake of watching the world burn. They want to spread chaos and misery for the joy of it. There was a demon uprising. Demons spewed forth onto the world. And this was only prevented from destroying the world with the help of devils. Devils are the lawful evil ones. Very much so taken from Christian mythology. Think of the devil himself, Satan, and think of structure, trickery allowed, but there are rules, there are structure, there are laws. Making a deal with the devil, that idea is very much so what devils, oops, I'm doing it backwards. Sorry, reverse that. Devils in D&D are actually the chaotic evil ones. The demons are the lawful evil ones. I play it the other way around. I actually do like the devil. The deal with the devil, that's why my devils are different. That's why I said it backwards. At any rate, plague of evil swept across the world. A different kind of evil is needed to help save the world from this evil. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. So this person asks, horrible plague of evil, a different kind of evil comes, helps save the world, and then prosperity spreads. Technology flourishes, advancements are made, and at some point, the gods of this world, viewing humans and other races of the world as becoming unappreciative of their gifts, and deciding that as a punishment for their lack of appreciation, their lack of devotion, that they actually are going to withdraw from this world. And so the person's, that was their preamble. This person's question is, what effects would God's leaving this world have? And my mind is just erupting with ideas at this point. My response was a great question, great idea. It sounds like a great campaign. The first thing that I assume would happen, the first thing that comes to my mind is you would have a collapse in almost all the major religions. My justification for this logic is, unlike the real world, where there are few, maybe scant, evidence of direct divine intervention in people's lives, people still believe. And I'm placing no judgment on that whatsoever. However, in a mystical world where gods have either walked the land, gods directly give individuals powers to do good with, or evil, gods speak to you in visions and in shrines and various things like that, to go from a world where the things you believe in are very hands-on to one where they are non-existent. Only the truly devout would remain devout in that reality, in that world. So all the people who believed because they saw the holy man walk down the street, heal this blind woman, that doesn't happen anymore. There are no miracles. There are literally zero miracles now, which is pretty much what clerics perform. Clerics pretty much are walking miracles in D&D. So with that taken away, you have a lack of example of why I should believe. You have a complete breakdown of the power that would make me believe. And then you have those who just feel scorned, those who feel rejected by the gods that they once worshipped, or that they would worship, and go, why would I worship you? If you don't want to be here for me, why would I give you my devotion? So this is very different than the real world. So with that context of very hands-on to none at all, I think it justifies the idea that religions would crash. The next important thing I noted was all the evil gods, gods of destruction and mayhem and murder, and this is obviously a polytheistic, a pantheon of gods of different things, which we have had on our world over many millennia. Uh, you have to recognize these gods would not be on board with this abandonment plan. These gods would go, oh, this is great. This is, yes, cha-ching. These gods are lining up to get their hands on every dejected, lost, desperate soul they can get their hands on. And why wouldn't they be? This is a windfall to all of the evil powers out there who can grant magical energies to mortals. So I assume, and I'm sure, that all of the evil gods would be breaking down the doors to give examples of their power, and that they're still willing to be there for you for a price. The next thing I pointed out, and this is these first three I think are probably the most interesting ideas I had, and I'll stop with this third one, is all of your current, former, and would-be clerics and paladins. I still consider paladins to be holy warriors in D&D, though as our culture has evolved and changed over the decades, paladins no longer have to be holy warriors in D&D, but I still like my paladins generally holy. You know, search for the Holy Grail, crusades, all that good jazz. So clerics and paladins, the holy warriors, the divine, the mortal representatives of the divine in the world, they would almost certainly see technology and mortal arrogance as the cause and the reason for why the gods have abandoned us. And that's on the most altruistic level. On a more selfish level, because you can still believe in a god and be selfish, obviously, they want their power back. You people and your ignorance and your greed and your selfishness and your hubris have cost me my powers. We are going to ban technology. We are going to burn the books that you're reading. We are going to destroy the diagrams and the technologies that have ruined this world, that have caused us to become a godless world. So I definitely picture an Inquisition-like experience, where your once very holy and devout and spiritually pure knights in shining armor, paladins, clerics, will be going town to town, region to region, and trying to get people to denounce the technology, denounce the things that they believe, and they will say are costing us our divine rights and our divine powers and our divine connections. So how that gets represented and what that does to the world is also very interesting. So those are the three ideas. You have a collapse in organized religion. There would still be believers. There would be fewer, further between, and those would really be your most devout believers, honestly, because now there is no evidence of the gods. There is no perks, if you will. Which true believers don't need perks, to be fair. Then you have the evil gods, who see this as their big chance to potentially run the world. So you would see a huge increase in cults, the occult. You would see a huge increase in people saying, forget this God of good, this God of law, this God of order. They abandoned you. You would have town criers. You would have people on pedestals espousing the virtue of a God that did not abandon us. So what if you have to do some evil things? Maybe there's a sacrifice involved. They're still there for you, unlike all the others. And then finally, the good guys potentially going to some darker ends to try to reattain the power they had, or to save us from ourselves. And I think that just those 3 answers, and I think I gave 8 answers overall, because there was a secondary question, which was, and why would the gods return? I think my answer to that was far less interesting, so I won't bother going into it. But those are the 3 primary answers I gave, and I think there's a lot of interaction between those answers, a lot of opportunity for how religion gets reflected in this world, which is darker, more desperate, lost, and though I'm not a religious person, I definitely appreciate the value that religion has in societies, and I like having more morality and morally ambiguous situations in my games to sort of get my players to question what is right, what is wrong, to get my players to question what do they personally believe, and then what do their characters believe. And both questions are important, both questions have value, and they do not need to be the same answer. And I'm quite happy when they aren't the same answer. So, bringing this back in to the original point, my homebrew campaign, which happens later today. Sorry, I'm big on tangents, long and short. So looking for interesting ideas for this lake, which is massive. The idea that reading and the idea that the more you know, the more you can imagine. In terms of advancements throughout history, a lot of the greatest inventors, they did a lot of reading. They educated themselves on lots of different ideas. And it is the reality that the more you know, the more you can imagine. Do not believe that in order to create something new, you have to disassociate yourself with all the things around you. The more you understand, the more you can piece together the steps that it took to get to this place, the more you can leap to that next mental step of how to progress it forward. So, something I read in an older book, an older D&D book, was a type of character, a D&D character, who ate meteorites. And the goal of this, the belief, was that these meteorites were magical, and they would imbue their essence onto you, which there are cultures throughout history which have believed very strange things. Eating animals will give you their spirit. You are what you eat is the modern day, notion of this. But you take this to a literal extent. What could I do with this? This character class actually went around eating meteorites, a very special meteorite. And as they advanced in level, which in game terms would mean as they did this more often, as they became more adept at it, they would start to see physical transformations in themselves, becoming stronger, becoming more hardened. Eventually, they basically turned into a golem, a living, sentient golem, which is pretty cool. So I thought, well, that's a cool idea. And then I read something else from another D&D book about this comet that caused dragons to go crazy. And then I saw another D&D campaign where a comet actually crashed to the world. And then I saw another D&D campaign where a comet brought luck and fortune to the world, and then it went dark one year, and all sorts of hell broke loose. It's like, big lake. What could cause a big lake? A meteor. So my very large lake is actually the result of a meteor impact. Hence, the name of the lake is Lake Meteor. And something that I didn't do as much as I wanted to, but I did mix in here and there. There's actually volcanic glass scattered around this lake. It is greenish in color. The largest island on the lake is actually Jade Island, because it is an island of almost entirely volcanic glass. And it is a very mythical place that, even though it's not even a day's travel from any one point on the lake, no one really knows what's there. It is, as I said, a place of mystery and uncertainty. So I named islands. Next thing I did with this area is I went for mountains and forests. I don't want to generically put them in, but I do want to have some sort of balance. I don't want the idea of just a flat world. I'm not a flat worlder. So we added mountains, we added forest to this area. Very generic in D&D. I put the dwarfs in the mountains, I put the elves in the forest. So there's my lake. I named probably a dozen towns around the lake. I created 4 major towns as the hubs of trade and commerce and sort of clout and influence for each empire. I named the empires, and I named the capital city of the empires. And that's about as far as I went with this lake region. And then once I finished with that, that took, honestly, most of that took about 3 hours, surprisingly. I was inspired, it just flowed through me. I then went to the next step, which was, well, what would this world look like? And I'd had so much fun with the lake and what the various water sources meant and how important water is, that I realized that I wanted at least a continent that was very much so water-centric. So don't worry about trying to read the names on this. They're not designed to be particularly legible for anyone like myself. But, you know, I went ahead and I drew out most of a continent. Pretty happy with how that turned out, honestly. There are 3 major lakes in this continent alone, which means this continent is probably somewhere on the scale of North America, maybe slightly larger. And I still haven't decided what some of the decisions I've made represent for the world, which is kind of an interesting idea, is building a world, putting something down and then going, now what does this